written by Arnold Crowther. Young Arnold was a great fan of Professor Smith's Punch and Judy show, and longed to follow in the Professor's footsteps, until the thought of swallowing a swazzle, the instrument which makes Punch's squeaky voice, put him off the idea.
I think my mother sensed that something had turned me against Punch and Judy. Maybe that was why she no longer forbade me to watch Professor Smith's puppet show. But in any case, this would have been impossible, for he never came back to his old haunts. Had he died, or changed his career, or had he merely found a more profitable pitch? I soon forgot all about swallowing squeakers and longed to see the Professor again. My mother sometimes took me for a day trip to the seaside, and one day we were walking along the front when we saw a crowd gathered round a red and white striped booth. I rushed across the road, and when I saw the name Smith painted on the booth, I thought I'd track my old friend down at last. But I was disappointed. The show finished, and a stranger emerged from the booth. To cheer me up, my mother took me to see a fortune teller. I can't remember what his name was, but he too called himself Professor. He had a little room on the front, and the window was full of testimonials from all kinds of royal and important people. I wondered what such a clever man was doing at the seaside, along with the sellers of ice cream and rock. We sat on an old horsehair sofa, waiting our turn to enter his secret sanctum. Eventually, the Professor drew back an old plush curtain and beckoned us in. He wore a shiny old frock coat and a big watch chain stretched across his enormous stomach. He had a big pointed wax moustache and a black skull cap. Over his shoulders was draped an old schoolmaster's gown, almost green with age. All around the room were shelves on which stood a collection of plaster heads. Many of these were divided into sections and covered with numbers. A stuffed crocodile with straw bursting out of it hung from the ceiling. The Professor sat me down on a bent wood chair. "A fine lad you have here," he told my mother. "He has the makings of a great man. What does he want to be when he grows up? But no, I will tell you." He then put his fingers in my hair and moved them about as though he was giving me a shampoo. "Kind, loving, and will be a great ladies' man and a leader of men." After a few more complimentary remarks, he asked my mother if she would have the complete reading for £0.50. "It would cost you 2 guineas if you came to my Harley Street rooms in London." My mother tried not to grin and decided upon the 2 and 6penny reading. The Professor proceeded to talk the biggest lot of rubbish I'd ever heard. I wished he'd stop mucking about with my head, or at least cut his nails, which had black edges as though he was in mourning. He gave me a good choice of careers, from a great general to a big businessman. "But I want to be a Punch and Judy man," I told him. "Good God, the child must be mad," he said, as he showed us out of his consulting room. "I told you never to mention that again," said my mother, and she remained silent all the way home. The following Christmas holidays, my parents let me give a party, and my mother was most annoyed when she discovered my father had hired a Punch and Judy man. My reaction was quite different, of course, and I had a long chat with the showman after his performance. He lived locally and invited me to call in and see him any time. I took him up on the offer a few days later, and he showed me how he made his puppets, not out of wood like Professor Smith's, but from papier-mâché. As he mixed his paper with Scotch glue instead of paste, they dried so hard that one could easily drive nails into them. John Rowland never worked the streets, he told me. He was a private entertainer, performing at children's parties, garden fetes, and school treats. I also found out that my mother wasn't the only person who didn't like Punch men. John's wife and family were all ashamed of his career, but despite the opposition, he refused to swap it for any other. He loved children, and to them, their laughter was better than all the money in the world. The day his wife died, he was engaged for a children's birthday party, and although he was heartbroken, he refused to cancel the engagement, as he felt he'd been letting the children down. Despite the great difference in our ages, John remained my greatest friend until he died at the age of 83, when his figure of Mr. Punch was buried with him in his coffin. I can see him now, entertaining the angels and cherubims with the exploits of Punch and Judy. I was determined that even if I couldn't be a professional Punch and Judy man, I would at least own my own show. After a few weeks' work with a sharp penknife and several cut fingers, I'd completed a set of puppet heads. I may have been all right at carving, but dressmaking wasn't my line at all. Rashly, I asked my mother if she would dress the puppets for me. This request opened up all the old wounds, and she bluntly refused to have anything to do with the puppets. There was nothing else for it. With a darning needle and some thread, I set to work and became my own dressmaker. The result was certainly no work of art, but the bodies held together and I was able to work the puppets. Later, I found out that all Punch men dress their own figures because their big stitches with long thread last much longer than a woman's delicate needlework. My next problem was obtaining a theatre. This wasn't so easy, as I knew my mother would never tolerate a large punch booth in the house. I called on my friend John Rowlands and asked if I could practice with his. He was quite willing, but his wife was against the idea. It was bad enough having a punch man for a husband without having the show given in her house. A school friend finally solved the problem. He was a butcher's son, and there was an old stable behind his father's shop next to the slaughterhouse. Charlie suggested that I should visit them at weekends and practice working the puppets over the stable door. I found it made an ideal puppet theatre, and I soon became the stable door Punch and Judy man. The audience consisted of local children who were willing to sit on hard ground and watch my impromptu shows. Many times my entertainment was interrupted by the squeals of some poor animal being slaughtered next door. My audience would then rise as one man and rush to the slaughterhouse door to watch the gory sight, leaving me and the puppets high and dry. One afternoon when I was performing, a huge rat jumped down from above and landed on my shoulders. I screamed out in fear, dashed through the door, and ran up the path with the puppet on either hand. The children roared with laughter, and I vowed never to enter that stable again. I didn't keep the vow, as the desire to become a Punch and Judy man soon overcame my fear of rats. That Christmas, Charlie had a party, and his father asked me if I'd do my Punch and Judy show for the children. I'd love to, I said, but they can't sit out in the snow, and I can't bring the stable door into the drawing room. That's true, he said. Will you do it if I make you a puppet theatre? I nearly jumped with joy at his suggestion, and when I walked into the stable the following Saturday, there stood a Punch and Judy booth, a real professional job with red and white stripes. The party was a great success. The children shouted out just as they used to do at Professor Smith's shows, and I wish the old fellow had been there to see my first public performance. When all the guests had gone, Charlie's father shook me by the hand. I must thank you for making the party such a success, he said, and putting his hand into his pocket, handed me 5 shillings. I looked at the 2 coins in my hand. It was my first fee. My fame spread among the local children, and I received invitations to perform at other parties. At the time, I thought this was because I was a good performer, but looking back, I realized it was probably because I was cheaper than a real punch worker. It was a case of anything will do for the kids. In order to keep the secret from my mother, I kept the puppets and booth in Charlie's father's stable. But you can't hide your light under a bushel forever. One of my teachers, hearing of my accomplishment, asked me if I'd do the show at the school concert. The rest of the program consisted of school songs and poems and a couple of tap dances. It was all pretty boring. So when the final curtain rose and revealed a Punch and Judy show, a great cheer went up from all the children. I was surprised how well the show was received, and in a real professional manner, I walked out of the booth to the center of the stage and bowed to the applauding audience. Suddenly, I saw my mother sitting in the third row. I almost fainted on the spot. She'd never attended a school function before. I visualized the good hiding she'd promised me if I didn't give up the idea of becoming a Punch and Judy man. Again I looked in her direction and saw that she was smiling and clapping like all the other parents. When I joined her at tea, she put a hand on my shoulder and said, "You were very good." From that day onwards, she never objected to Punch and Judy, providing they didn't interfere with my schoolwork. She even offered to redress the puppets for me and paid for small advertisements in the local paper. Whenever there was a write-up of one of my shows, she used to cut it out and stick it in a scrapbook. One day, I received an engagement at a church hall the other side of town. When I arrived, I found a hand-painted poster announcing my performance. In large letters, it stated that, at enormous expense, the services had been engaged of Professor Crowther and his Royal Punch and Judy show. The hall was already full, and as I walked through the audience, carrying a case of puppets and the bundle which contained the folded-up booth, everyone stared at me. It must have been a shock to discover that the professor was a young lad of 14. I never used a swazzle for my shows, but nobody complained that Punch's voice wasn't squeaky enough. I realized that it was only the street performers who really needed the swazzle. The sound made by it could be heard at a great distance and would attract spectators to the show. It distorted the words so that often it was difficult to hear what Punch was saying, but this wouldn't worry the showman, who was more interested in gathering a crowd than in perfect diction. Be this as it may, I was determined to be one Punch and Judy man who never swallowed a swazzle. By the time I left school, I had quite a number of regular bookings and was well on the way to making a living in the profession of my choice. But it wasn't as simple as that. My mother no longer objected to me being a semi-professional puppeteer and making money in my spare time, but she was certainly not going to let me make a full-time job of it. The very thought of sitting in an office all day frightened me. I wanted to travel around the country, seeing different places and making people laugh. But my future was already settled. I was to go to college and then enter my father's business.